He sent his wife away for a crime she didn't commit, and found redemption in her arms. Years later. He never should have believed the lie, but sometimes a single whispered accusation can destroy a man faster than any sword. And that was how Duke Rowan Thorne lost the only woman he had ever truly loved. The kingdom of Eldermere remembered the day clearly. A winter morning, cold enough to freeze breath in the air, when the Duchess Alara Thorne stood before her husband, confused, terrified, and trembling beneath the weight of a crime she didn't commit. The accusation was absurd. Treason, theft of royal documents, a conspiracy to betray the crown. Alara had spent her life in devotion to Rowan, managing his lands, healing the sick in the villages, even stitching his wounds during battle. Yet one forged letter, slipped beneath Rowan's door by unseen hands, was enough to turn suspicion into fury. "Tell me the truth," Rowan demanded, his voice breaking despite his attempt at authority. "Did you meet with the envoy from Varinthia at midnight?" "I did not," she whispered. "Rowan, I swear on my life." "Then why was this found in your writing desk?" He threw the letter at her feet. Alara picked it up with shaking hands. The seal was forged, painfully so. She tried to speak, to explain that someone must have planted it, but Rowan's face had already hardened into something she had never seen on him before. Fear, not of her, but of losing everything he had built. The council demanded swift action. Rumors spread like wildfire. Rowan's enemies circled like wolves, and one name whispered among them, quietly, cunningly, was Lady Marianne Vale, Rowan's trusted advisor, and the woman who had always gazed at him with forbidden longing. In the great hall, before nobles and servants, Alara faced Rowan one last time. "Do you truly believe I would betray you?" she asked, her voice breaking. Rowan opened his mouth, but no words came. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said nothing. And silence, Alara realized, can cut deeper than any blade. "I hereby order," Rowan declared hoarsely, "that the Duchess Alara of House Wynne be exiled from Thornhall until further judgment." The guards approached. Alara did not fight them. Her eyes remained on Rowan, searching for the man she married, the man who once swore to protect her even from his own fears. But that man was gone. As she was escorted through the gates, snowflakes landing softly on her hair, Rowan turned away, not out of hatred, but out of cowardice. And cowardice, Alara understood, was the most tragic flaw a hero could possess. She left the castle with nothing, no title, no protection, no husband, only a shattered heart and the echo of Rowan's final words ringing in her soul. And Rowan, left alone in the cold marble hall, did not know then that sending her away would become the greatest sin of his life. Because while he believed he was protecting his kingdom, he never realized he was destroying the only part of it that had ever truly kept him human. The courtyard of Highridge Keep was still wrapped in mist when Lady Alara Whitcomb was brought forward, her wrists bound with a strip of linen, not because she was dangerous, but because appearances mattered. Before her stood the man who had once sworn eternal devotion, Duke Rowan Allister, a figure carved from pride and unbending duty. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the horizon rather than on her. He refused to look at the woman he was about to lose. Around them, the nobles murmured among themselves, clutching their cloaks against the winter chill. Rumors had spread like wildfire. The Duchess had committed treason. She had been accused of passing sensitive military routes to a foreign envoy, an act that could shatter the kingdom's defenses. Rowan had demanded proof. The council had delivered forged letters. And without hearing her speak, without asking her a single question, he condemned her. Alara, who had never lied to him. Alara, who had loved him more fiercely than life itself. Alara, who had begged to be heard and was silenced with a gesture of his hand. She stood in front of him now, her gown simple, her hair loosely braided, the cold biting at her skin. Yet she looked at him with a strength that made even the guards shift uncomfortably. "Rowan," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "If you would only listen." "I have listened," he replied, though his voice cracked almost imperceptibly. "The evidence is clear. This is my final word." Her eyes darkened, not with fear, but with heartbreak. "And would you still call it evidence if it cost you the only person who ever stood by you?" Something inside him twisted. But pride, his oldest, cruelest companion, would not let him bend. "The carriage waits, Alara," he said, taking a step back as if distance could soften the blow. "You will live comfortably in exile, but you will not return." A single tear escaped her, but she did not wipe it away. "One day you will know the truth," she whispered, "and on that day, you will understand what you've done." Rowan felt those words lodge deep within him, but he shoved them down into the pit where he hid all things that frightened him. He lowered his gaze. "Take her." The guards escorted her to the carriage at the castle gates. Snow began to fall, soft, fragile flakes landing on her hair as though winter mourned with her. She looked back one last time. Rowan was on the steps, rigid as iron. But his eyes were full of a storm he refused to let break. The carriage doors closed. The horses began to move. And with each turn of the wheels, something inside Rowan fractured. But he said nothing. Did nothing. Not even when her figure disappeared beyond the walls. Not even when his sister, Lady Maera, whispered at his shoulder, "Brother, what if we are wrong?" "We are not," he lied. "We cannot be." But doubt had already begun its slow, merciless work. Alara traveled for days, across frozen rivers and desolate forests, until the carriage reached the quiet, remote village of Heartmoor, a place she had once visited as a girl. She stepped out into the crisp air, her wrists free at last, though the bruises of betrayal remained unseen beneath her sleeves. She rented a modest cottage at the village outskirts, near the edge of the woods. The days were lonely, the nights colder than she had ever known, but she refused to break. Instead, she tended to the villagers, healing the sick, helping farmers read contracts they could not understand, offering kindness in a world that had shown her none. They loved her. They called her Lady Alara of Heartmoor, the gentle healer with eyes full of sorrow and hands full of grace. And slowly, painfully, she built a life without the man she had once believed would die before hurting her. Back at High Ridge, Rowan tried to drown his doubts in work. Battles, negotiations, council meetings. He buried himself in them all. But every corridor whispered her name. Every corner of their chambers reminded him of her absence. Every night he returned to their empty bed and lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence louder than any accusation. When the War Council finally discovered the truth, that the traitor was not Alara, but Lord Evander Morrow, Rowan's most trusted advisor, it was already too late. The forged letters were traced back to Evander. The envoy confessed, and Rowan felt the world collapse beneath him. He had destroyed the woman who had never once betrayed him. He had sent away the only person who had ever loved him without condition. He had exiled his heart. Mara found him in his private chambers, collapsed to his knees, the broken letters scattered around him like ashes. "What have I done?" he whispered. Mara knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The question is not what you've done, but what you will do now." And Rowan, broken, grieving, desperate, rose with one purpose. He would find her. He would beg. He would weep if he must. He would seek redemption in the arms of the woman he had shattered, even if she never forgave him. The first winter without her was the harshest the kingdom had seen in decades. Snow covered the rooftops of Eldenhold, the Duke's ancestral fortress, muffling every sound, turning the world into a white tomb. And inside its stone walls, Duke Rowan Aldenhart lived as though buried alive. He had sent his wife away. He had signed the decree himself. And every morning since, the ink of his own signature felt like iron scraping down his spine. He told himself he had done the right thing. He told himself duty came before love. He told himself the evidence had been undeniable. But lies repeated, even inside one's own heart, have a short lifespan. And silence is a brutal judge. The servants said nothing, but their eyes said everything. They had adored Lady Seraphina Aldenhart, the Duchess who had breathed life into a cold house and brought warmth to every servant's day. She had never yelled, never demeaned, never demanded more than she gave. The Duchess had been the soul of Eldenhold, and Rowan had ripped that soul out with his own hands. Day after day, Rowan returned to an empty solar, an empty dining hall, an empty bed. The absence was physical. It clawed at his lungs, scraped at his chest, and gnawed at the edges of his sanity. Her laughter used to fill the halls like sunlight. Now he couldn't remember the sound without wanting to break. But pride is a cruel master, and Rowan had lived under its command since he was a boy. So he never spoke her name. Not once. Seraphina, meanwhile, lived in exile, a fate harsher than imprisonment. She was not sent to a dungeon, nor chained, nor beaten. No. Her punishment was worse. To carry the weight of a crime she did not commit, branded as a traitor to the man she loved, sent away from the life she had built with him. She lived in a small cottage on the edge of the kingdom, under the watch of royal wardens who saw her as nothing more than a political stain. She never complained. She never begged for mercy. Each day she rose before dawn, tended the garden, cooked her meals, and wrote in the journal she kept beside her bed. Letters addressed to Rowan that she knew she would never send. She should have hated him. Any other woman would have. But love is a stubborn flame. It does not die just because it is wounded. What hurt her most was not the exile. It was the certainty in his eyes when he had accused her. That quiet, cold belief that she was capable of betraying him. The memory haunted her every night. The way he refused to hear her explanation. The way he dismissed her tears. The way his voice had broken when he said the words, "I trusted you, and you destroyed that trust." She had reached for him then, desperate for the warmth that used to be hers. But he had stepped back, and something inside her had shattered so violently that it would take years for the pieces to find each other again. 2 years passed this way. Rowan drowning in guilt he refused to name, Seraphina surviving on fragments of hope she didn't dare nurture. And then, bit by bit, truth began to unravel. The forged documents, the planted evidence, the sudden disappearance of the chambermaid who had accused Seraphina. The inconsistencies Rowan had ignored because anger had clouded his judgment. And one night, by the dim light of a single candle, Rowan discovered the final piece, a sealed confession, written by the real traitor, hidden among old archives. The truth hit him like a sword to the gut. Seraphina had been innocent, all along. He read the confession again, and again, and again. Each word cut deeper than the last. He had sent away the only woman he had ever loved. He had destroyed her life. He had abandoned her when she needed him most. Rowan sank to the floor, the parchment trembling in his hands, and for the first time in years, the Duke of Eldenhold bowed his head and wept. Silent, desperate, gut-wrenching sobs he had never allowed himself to feel. His voice cracked into the empty room. "Gods! What have I done?" The candles flickered. The cold crept in. But Rowan didn't feel any of it. He felt only the weight of every mistake he had made. He had raised an army once. He had defended borders. He had survived battles. He had won wars. But none of that mattered. He had failed at the only duty that had ever truly mattered. protecting Serafina, loving her, believing her, and now he had to face the possibility that she would refuse to ever return. He deserved it. He knew he did. But Rowan Aldenhart had never been a man to accept defeat without a fight. He rose, wiped his tears, and whispered into the darkness, "I'm going to find you, Serafina. Even if you never forgive me, I will spend the rest of my life earning the right to hear your voice again." The forest road that led to the Silver Monastery of Asterfell was quiet at dawn, its ancient pines rising like silent sentinels. Lord Rowan Thorne had walked that path countless times in the last week, though he had never dared approach the gate. Each sunrise he told himself he would return to his estate, forget this impossible pilgrimage, and accept the exile his wife had chosen. Yet every dawn found him again standing at the edge of those woods, staring at the monastery walls as if they held the only truth left in his ruined life. He had rehearsed his words 1,000 times. None survived the moment he actually saw her. For Alara was no longer the fragile, wounded woman he remembered. When she emerged from the chapel carrying a basin of water for the herb gardens, the light caught her profile in a way that made Rowan's breath falter. She was thinner, yes, but not broken. Her posture was straighter, her steps measured, her expression peaceful in a way he had never seen during their marriage. The grief he had burdened her with had burned away into something quieter, stronger. He watched from behind the trees, cowardly but captivated, unable to move. The monks greeted her with respect. A few novices rushed forward to carry heavy baskets for her. Their affection was genuine. She smiled at them gently, the kind of smile Rowan had never been able to earn because he had crushed it before it could bloom. He felt a searing twist of shame. She built a life without me, a better one. By the time she turned and noticed a shadow among the trees, Rowan's heart stumbled in his chest. Alara's eyes widened, but not with joy, with a kind of stunned disbelief, touched by the faintest echo of hurt. As if the past she had fought so hard to bury had suddenly risen from the grave. "Rowan," she whispered, the name tasting foreign on her tongue. He stepped into the morning light, unable to hide the exhaustion carved into his face. "Alara, I didn't expect you to speak to me." Her gaze dropped to the earth. For a long moment, only the wind spoke between them. "I thought you would stay far from here," she said softly. "You made your choice." "Yes," he murmured. "And it was the worst choice of my life." Alara's jaw tightened, the old wound flickering alive behind her eyes. "You believed them," she said, her voice trembling with a bitterness that time had not erased. "You believed a lie about me so easily. It took a single accusation to undo everything we were." Rowan lowered his head. "I know, and every day since I've wished I could undo it." She turned away, gripping the edge of the basin as if grounding herself. "Wishes are wind, Rowan. They change nothing." Yet her voice cracked just enough for him to sense that her heart was not made of stone. Not yet. "I came," he said gently, "because the truth finally reached me. I know who framed you. I know why. And I swear to you, I will not rest until your name is cleared before every lord, every noble, every servant who ever doubted you." Silence. Then, "My name does not need clearing anymore," she whispered. "I have found peace here." Rowan's throat tightened. "And I have found torment without you." That made her look up sharply, anger flashing behind her calm demeanor. "Do not place your suffering at my feet. You cast me out. You condemn me without allowing me a single breath of defense." "I know," he said, voice breaking. "Gods forgive me, I know." Her lips quivered, barely, but he saw it, because the pain she carried was not gone. It had simply been buried beneath her new life. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come after all these years?" What do you expect of me?" He swallowed. "Only a chance to speak, to look at you without the weight of lies between us. To ask—" He hesitated, terrified of the answer. "To ask if there is anything left in your heart that has not turned to ashes because of me." Ilara froze. The air around them chilled, though the sun had begun to rise. She set down the basin slowly, her hands trembling. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice cracking with truth, not malice. "I don't know what remains. I built this life to survive what you did, to heal from it." He stepped closer, not enough to touch her, just enough to let her feel the warmth of his regret. "Ilara, healing doesn't mean you must live without love." She shook her head. "You don't get to say the word love to me, Rowan Thorne. Not after what your doubt cost us." His breath hitched. She was right. Of all her accusations, this one cut deepest. He knelt, not in shame before the monks, not in fear before the king, but before the woman he had destroyed. "Ilara, if I must spend the rest of my life atoning, I will. If I must earn one small fragment of your forgiveness, I will spend every breath doing so. Just let me try." Her eyes filled with tears, unbidden, unwanted. She hated that he could still shake her heart after all he had done. "Rowan, get up," she whispered, turning her face away so he would not see the tears falling. "You kneel too late." He rose slowly, pain etched into every movement. "I know," he said, "but I kneel sincerely." She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "Then let me learn to be a man who deserves that trust," he said softly, "even if you never give it." And for the first time in years, Ilara did not walk away first. She simply stood there, trembling and torn, as Rowan Thorne waited with a patience born from anguish, and hope he did not deserve. The journey back to Ravenspire Keep took 3 days, but to Lady Isolde, it felt like walking through the echoes of a life she no longer claimed as hers. The forest she once crossed on horseback with carefree laughter now seemed haunted by memories. Her heart remained steady, but her breath carried a heaviness she had learned to hide over the years. Beside her rode Sir Aldrich, the king's personal envoy, and behind them traveled 2 wagons carrying guards and provisions. The king had insisted on military escort, not because Isolde was in danger, but because the truth she carried was. A truth that could fracture the kingdom. A truth the Duke should have uncovered long ago, before choosing pride over love. When the towers of Ravenspire finally rose on the horizon, dark against the pale winter sky, Isolde felt the familiar sting beneath her ribs. It was not fear. She had long buried that. It was the memory of a home that had cast her out, and a husband who had believed the worst of her without hesitation. Sir Aldrich looked at her gently. "Are you prepared for what may await, my lady?" Isolde pulled her cloak tighter. "I have survived far worse than his judgment." She had, but the ghosts inside those walls would see her differently. The gates opened with slow, heavy groans that echoed through the courtyard. Servants peered through windows. Guards straightened their posture. The wind carried whispers as her boots touched the stone. Isolde of Ravenspire had returned. Not the accused wife, not the disgraced duchess, but a woman the king himself had summoned. A woman the truth now shielded. The Duke had expected her arrival, though not so soon. When he stepped out from the stone archway of the keep, Isolde felt her chest tighten as if strings from a past life pulled her heart taut. He looked older, not in years, in grief. The shadows beneath his eyes, the lines carved at the corners of his mouth, the hollow tension in his shoulders. These were not marks of time. They were marks of regret. He walked toward her slowly. Isolde. Her name on his lips tasted like longing and remorse, She kept her spine straight, her chin lifted. She neither bowed nor smiled. "My lord." The distance in her tone cut deeper than any blade. He swallowed hard. "I did not expect the king to send you personally. His Majesty prefers that the truth travel with the one who lived it," she said evenly. His gaze flicked away, guilt rising like a tide. "Isolde, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but may we speak alone?" Sir Aldrich stepped forward. "Her ladyship is under royal escort. She is not to be questioned without my presence." Isolde raised a hand. "It is all right, Aldrich. The truth belongs to me." The knight hesitated, then nodded, stepping back. The Duke led her into the old solar, the room where they once shared wine and quiet moments of peace before the world shattered beneath them. Now the hearth lay cold. Dust veiled the table. It felt like a tomb. He closed the door behind them, his breath unsteady. "I have wanted to speak to you for years," he confessed. She kept her gaze on the frost-covered window. "You made your choice years ago. Words change nothing." "Words may not," he said quietly, "but the truth might." She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes, the same eyes that once held warmth and now drowned in regret. "Then tell me," she said, "why you believed I was capable of treason." His body tensed. "Because I was a fool." She said nothing. Silence, she knew, was a sharper blade. He stepped forward, but not close enough to touch her. "When the accusations came, I was already battling enemies at the border. I was exhausted. Doubt crept in where trust should have stood. I never should have allowed it. I never should have— You should have known me," she interrupted. Her voice was soft, but the pain beneath it was raw. He flinched as if struck. "You're right." Isolde inhaled deeply, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her cloak. "For years, I begged the gods to give me a chance to prove my innocence," she said. "Not for justice, but because I loved you." His eyes glistened. "Isolde." She held up a hand. "Do not speak my name as if it still belongs to you." That broke him. She saw it, the collapse of a man's pride beneath the weight of his own sins. At last, he sank into the chair behind him, burying his face in his hands. "I have lived every day wishing to undo what I did. When I learned the truth, your innocence, the lies, the betrayal." His voice cracked. "I realized I had destroyed the only good thing I ever had." Isolde looked at him, but not with hatred. Pity. Pity was worse. Pity meant he no longer had the power to wound her. She moved toward the door. "I did not come back for your forgiveness," she said. He stood abruptly. "Then why are you here?" She stopped, just at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the cold winter light. "To show you the truth," she said, "and to see whether you are worthy of the redemption you seek." Then she opened the door, letting the past slip behind her like a final breath. The next spring brought no warmth to Eldenheart, no matter how bright the sun glowed above its stone towers. The people resumed their lives, merchants reopened their shops, and the court regained its shallow laughter. But the Duke, Aldrich Thorne, moved through each day like a man carved from frost. 3 years had passed since he sent Alara, his wife, into exile. 3 years since he exiled the only gentle thing that had ever entered his life. It was supposed to be justice, or so he had told himself. He wanted to believe she had betrayed him. He needed to believe she had betrayed him. Because if she hadn't, then he had become his worst fear, a man capable of destroying the innocent. Aldrich kept the world at a distance. He hunted less, spoke less, slept barely at all. Servants whispered that the Duke wandered the halls at night, stopping at the empty rooms that had once belonged to her. He sometimes touched the carved wooden doorframe, only to withdraw his hand quickly, as if burned by the memory. He had tried to fill the void she left. He buried himself in political matters, land disputes, border conflicts, anything to keep him from thinking of the way she would smile lightly whenever he entered the room, or the softness in her voice when she called him by name. But every night, the truth returned. He had loved her. He had never said it, and now he might never have the chance. Across the kingdom, in a quiet riverside village far from nobility, Ilara built a life from nothing. Her exile had been public, banners torn down, titles stripped, accusations whispered in every shade of cruelty. The humiliation alone would have crushed anyone else. But Ilara refused to let despair define her. She found shelter in the cottage of a widowed healer named Seraphine, a woman who saw past Ilara's quiet grief and recognized her strength. In time, Ilara learned medicine, not court medicine, but the real kind, binding wounds, treating fevers, comforting mothers in childbirth, saving children with herbs she learned to grow with her own hands. The villagers came to love her. They called her the river's blessing. They said she had a touch that calmed storms. They had no idea she was once a duchess. She never told them. She didn't want to be pitied. She wanted to live. But even as the seasons passed, even as children she had delivered grew big enough to run through the fields, she could not forget Aldrich. Not because of the accusation, but because of the way he looked at her when he believed it, as if she had torn his heart in half. There was a sorrow inside him deeper than anger, deeper than betrayal, a sorrow she longed to understand, a sorrow she once thought she could heal. But that possibility had died the moment he condemned her, or so she believed. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the river and the sky blazed in gold, a familiar banner appeared on the horizon. The villagers panicked. No one expected nobles this far from the capital. Ilara stood at the gate of the village, her heart pounding, her hands cold. She knew that crest. She had traced it in ink 100 times while still a duchess. It was Aldrich's. He dismounted slowly, and when his hood fell, the years carved into his face stunned her. He looked older, yes, but also emptier, as if life had been quietly draining from him since the day she left. Ilara, he breathed. Her name sounded like a confession. She wanted to run. She wanted to strike him. She wanted to collapse into his arms and ask him why. Instead, she kept her voice steady. "My lord, you should not be here." He looked at her with something raw, fragile, almost frightened. "I have searched for you for months." "For what purpose?" "To beg your forgiveness." The words fell heavy, unbelievable. Villagers froze. Seraphine stepped forward protectively, but Ilara lifted a hand to stop her. Aldrich continued, each word trembling. "I know the truth now. I know you were innocent. I know you suffered because of me. And if the gods are merciful, you will allow me to say what I should have said the day I married you." Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was cruel. I destroyed the only person who ever brought light into my life." Ilara's heart twisted painfully. For years she had imagined this moment, but it did not bring relief, only a deeper ache. "You cannot undo the past," she said softly. "I know, but let me atone. Let me prove to you that the man I was does not have to be the man I remain." She saw the truth in his eyes. Years of torment, guilt, shattered pride, desperate hope. But forgiveness. Forgiveness was not something one gave in a single breath. Not after being cast aside. Not after building a life from ashes. Not after being forced to choose strength because the world offered no mercy. Ilara inhaled deeply, her voice steady but heavy with everything she had endured. "If what you seek is redemption," she said, "then understand something. Redemption is not earned by returning to the past. He swallowed hard. Then where is it earned? In the man you choose to become, not in the apology you bring to me. Aldrich bowed his head, a rare gesture of humility that once would have been impossible for him. Then allow me to earn it. Allow me to stay. Her breath caught, not with fear, but with the weight of possibilities. Behind her, the villagers watched. Ahead of her, the man who broke her waited. Between them stood a chasm carved by years, and perhaps the faint beginning of a bridge. Rain fell softly over Highwick Monastery, the same place where Lysandra had rebuilt her life piece by piece, far from the accusations that had shattered her name. The bells tolled in the distance, their deep echoes rolling over the hills like a benediction carved into the mist. Lysandra stood inside the scriptorium, her hand steady as she guided a quill across parchment. She no longer wrote decrees or court announcements. She wrote letters for widows, birth records for villagers, journals for orphans who still believed their lives could matter. The monks said she carried a serenity that could calm storms, but none of them knew how hard it had been earned. Behind her, the door opened. She did not look up. Visitors were common, mostly locals seeking guidance or simple conversation. But the air shifted, heavy, like a shadow stepping into the room. Lysandra. Her hand froze. Her name had not been spoken like that, not with reverence and terror intertwined, in years. She turned slowly. Valerian Aldridge, Duke of Rosequartz, stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his cloak dripping onto the stone floor. His beard was rougher, his eyes sunken, and the proud, imperious man he once was had been stripped away until nothing remained but remorse. For a moment, neither spoke. The world held its breath. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you here?" "I've searched for you for years," he said, voice trembling. "I've crossed kingdoms, begged hunters, bribed merchants. I thought you were dead. Maybe for you, I was." His jaw tightened. "I deserve that." She placed the quill down. "You deserve more than a few sharp words." The Duke swallowed. "I know." He took a step forward, but she lifted a hand, gentle, yet commanding enough to freeze him. "Not one more step, Valerian. Not until you tell me why." He lowered his gaze, the weight of his sins dragging his shoulders down. "I came to beg for forgiveness." Her breath hitched, unexpectedly, painfully. "Forgiveness? From the woman you banished? From the woman you condemned without proof? From the woman you allowed to be shamed, exiled, and hunted?" He flinched. "Yes." Inside her, old wounds pulsed, ones she thought had scarred over long ago. 1,000 memories flickered between them. The night he accused her, the betrayal in his stare, the way his voice cut deeper than any blade, the carriage that carried her away from everything she had ever known. She steadied herself. "And what makes you think I owe you anything at all?" "I owe you everything," he whispered. "I owe you the life you should have had, the home I took from you, the name I let them drag through the mud. I owe you apologies I cannot count, and explanations you may not want to hear." "Then why come now?" "Because the truth has finally come to light." Her heart stilled. Truth. That word had once been the blade that nearly ended her. What truth? Valerian reached into his cloak and removed a parchment, old, worn, sealed with a crest she recognized instantly. The crest of his late wife's family. Her heart throbbed painfully. "They found the real culprit," he said hoarsely. "The one who framed you." Her fingers curled. It couldn't be. She had long abandoned the hope of justice. Justice was not something the betrayed were ever promised. "Who?" she breathed. Valerian swallowed. "The treasurer. The same man who handled the estate's finances. He stole from the royal coffers. When suspicion fell on the household, he needed someone to take the fall. His voice cracked. You were the perfect scapegoat. Lysandra closed her eyes. She had known she was innocent. She had known she was loyal. But hearing the truth spoken aloud, years too late, reopened every wound she had buried. Valerian stepped forward, but cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal. I destroyed you, he whispered, and it was all for nothing. I punished the wrong person. I punished the only person who ever loved me without wanting anything in return. Lysandra exhaled a shuddering breath. There it was, the confession she once dreamed of hearing, before she learned to dream of nothing at all. You ruined my life, she said numbly. I know. You broke everything inside me. I know. You left me alone in a world that wanted me dead. He closed his eyes. I will carry that sin until I am in the ground. Lysandra turned away, unable to bear the sight of him kneeling, of him humbled, broken, stripped of the arrogance that once blinded him. I am not the same woman you cast aside, she said quietly. That is why I came, Valerian replied. Because I need the woman you became, to know that I am not the same man either. She froze. Silence thickened between them. Heavy, suffocating, filled with everything they once were, and everything they could never be again. He rose slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to return with me. I don't expect anything. I came because you deserve to know the truth. You deserved it years ago. Lysandra's breath trembled. And what do you expect now? He looked at her. Not as a duke, not as a man seeking absolution, but as someone who had finally tasted humility. I expect nothing, he said, only to spend the rest of my life proving that I am not the man who hurt you. Lysandra's eyes blurred with tears she had not shed in years. She turned away to hide them. Outside, the monastery bells tolled again, deep and resonant, as if marking the end of something old and the beginning of something uncertain, perhaps even something new. Years drifted by like mist rolling over the northern hills, soft but relentless. The world changed, and so did Rowan of High Ridge. But some wounds do not fade with time, they deepen. High Ridge Castle once echoed with certainty, command, and the sharp rhythm of Rowan's unshakable authority. Now its halls were painfully quiet. Servants spoke in hushed voices, music no longer filled the winter feasts, and the Duke himself, the man once feared and respected in equal measure, carried an invisible weight wherever he walked. The absence of Alara had carved something out of him, something vital. At first he refused to name it. Then he drowned it in duty. Finally, he accepted it. He had banished the only person who had ever softened his world. His mother's poisoning, the tragedy that had shattered the duchy, had driven him into a darkness he had not recognized until it was too late. The night he sent Alara away replayed in his mind endlessly. Her tearful confusion, his cold accusation. The slam of the carriage door as soldiers escorted her into exile. And worst of all, the silence that followed her pleading voice. He had never forgotten the way she whispered, I would have died for you, Rowan. Why won't you believe me? At the time, anger had blinded him. Now, the memory crushed him. The duchy grew weaker each year, not because Rowan lacked skill, but because he lacked heart. The people mourned his mother, but they mourned Alara's absence even more. Alara had been the light of High Ridge, always offering kindness, always working to ease suffering among the poor and the sick. The villagers still left candles at the steps of the old chapel where she once prayed. They whispered her name with reverence. Some even prayed for her return. Rowan pretended not to hear, but every candle was a reminder of the truth he had refused to face. His turning point came unexpectedly. It was early spring when an old family ally arrived at High Ridge, traveled from across the mountains despite his frail health. Lord Hawthorne was one of the last nobles alive who had known the Duke's mother intimately, and who had known Elara well. Rowan welcomed him with guarded respect, but Lord Hawthorne wasted no time with pleasantries. "Rowan," the old man rasped, "I've come to give you the truth your anger blinded you from." Rowan stiffened. "About my mother?" "No," Hawthorne replied. "About your wife." The Duke's heart stopped. Hawthorne placed a sealed parchment on the table, brittle with age, but bearing a familiar crest, the mark of his late mother. Rowan swallowed. "What is this?" "Your mother's final message," Hawthorne whispered. "It was delivered to me because she feared you would be consumed by grief. She feared exactly what happened." Hands trembling, Rowan broke the seal. The letter was short, written in delicate but steady script. "My son, if this reaches you, then I am gone. You must know one truth above all. Elara is innocent. She has served me with unwavering loyalty, and in her presence I have known peace. If harm comes to her by your command, you will lose more than a wife. You will lose yourself." The letter slipped from Rowan's fingers. His knees nearly buckled beneath him. All the breath left his lungs. The roaring in his ears felt like punishment from the gods. Why was this not delivered sooner?" he whispered. Hawthorne lowered his head. "Because grief made you unreachable, Rowan, and I feared what the truth might drive you to do." The Duke collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the dying fire. Everything he had built, his certainty, his righteousness, his judgment, shattered in a single moment. He had banished an innocent woman. He had destroyed her life, and in doing so, he had destroyed his own. That night, Rowan did not sleep. He paced, haunted by memories. Elara laughing softly as she fed pastries to the kitchen children. Elara tending to his mother's sickbed. Elara placing a gentle hand on his cheek when nightmares plagued him. Elara reaching for him on the night he destroyed her hope. By dawn, he made his decision. He would find her. He would cross kingdoms if necessary. He would kneel if he had to. He would bring Elara home, not as a duke reclaiming a possession, but as a ruined man seeking redemption from the only soul who could grant it. But Rowan did not yet know how deeply Elara had suffered, nor how much she had changed. The snow had begun to thaw by the time Dorian Ravenshade, Duke of Edivane, reached the old stone bridge that marked the border of the Northern Territories. He had crossed this bridge once before as a different man, harder, colder, blinded by the arrogance of his own certainty. Now he crossed it with the weight of 7 winters pressing on his shoulders. 7 winters since he had cast Elara from his lands. 7 winters since he had believed without questioning, judged without listening, condemned without mercy. 7 winters since he had driven away the only woman who had ever truly seen him. His horse moved slowly on the slick stones, steam rising from its nostrils into the biting air. Dorian's breath came out ragged, not from the cold, but from the fear gnawing at his bones. What would he find on the other side of this journey? A stranger wearing her face, a woman hardened beyond forgiveness, a ghost of what once had been, or nothing at all? He didn't know, but he had reached the point in his life where not knowing her fate hurt more than any truth could. Elara had left Edivane with nothing but the clothes on her back and the crushing accusation that she had leaked military strategies to a rival duchy. Dorian had never allowed her to speak a word in her defense. He had been too furious, too betrayed, too determined to believe that he, the Duke who feared no enemy, had been deceived by his own wife. But the truth had rotted inside him since the moment it was uncovered. She had been innocent. The spy had been a trusted advisor, and the false evidence against her had been fabricated. He had destroyed her life because he had been too proud to imagine he might be wrong. and now he was left with a remorse so vast it hollowed him out from the inside. His court no longer respected him. His alliances had weakened. Even his own reflection had begun to look back at him with judgment. Redemption was not a right. It was a battlefield. And he was marching into it with no armor left. When he reached the village at the foot of the northern mountains, he dismounted and walked on foot. People watched him with an unease that carved deeper into his chest with every step. They recognized him. They remembered what he had done. An elderly woman selling bread narrowed her eyes. "Looking for someone, Your Grace?" His throat tightened. Ilara Ravenshade. "Do you know where she lives?" The old woman's expression softened slightly, not with warmth, but with pity. "Aye, she lives up in the monastery lands, helps the healers, keeps to herself, doesn't speak your name." The last sentence struck him like a blade. He nodded in silence. "Follow the ridge," the woman added. "When you reach the stone chapel, you'll feel it." He did not understand what she meant. Not until he reached the top. The chapel was small, ancient, enveloped in snow-dusted pines. Lanterns glowed softly in the windows, casting golden halos on the frost-covered ground. And there, kneeling by a wooden bench outside, lighting a candle with her delicate hands, was the woman he had spent 7 years trying and failing to forget. Ilara. Her hair was longer now, tied loosely beneath a woolen hood. The wind tugged at loose strands, revealing a profile that nearly brought him to his knees. Not only because it was familiar, but because it had changed. This was a woman who had endured, who had rebuilt herself, who no longer belonged to him, if she ever had. He inhaled sharply. The sound must have reached her because she froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes met his. Dorian felt the world fracture. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something far worse. Recognition. Recognition of the man he used to be, and the one he was trying to become. Ilara stood slowly, candle trembling between her fingers. Her voice, the voice he had silenced for years, carried across the cold air like a memory refusing to die. "Why are you here, Dorian?" Her use of his name, not his title, hit harder than any accusation. "I came," his voice faltered, "to beg your forgiveness." Her eyes darkened, but not with hatred, with hurt. Hurt does not disappear because you regret causing it. "I know. You destroyed my life. I know." "Then why do you think forgiveness is something you may ask for?" He lowered his head. "I don't ask for it because I deserve it. I ask because I can no longer survive without telling you the truth." She swallowed, candle flame trembling between them. And what truth would that be? That I ruined the only good thing I ever had. And that every night since the day you left, I've suffered with the knowledge that you were innocent. The candle slipped from her fingers and fell into the snow, extinguished instantly. Ilara's breath hitched, not with pain, but with something deeper. A crack in her armor. She turned away, pressing a hand to her chest as if steadying a wound that had never healed. "Too many years have passed, Dorian." He shook his head. "Time has changed you. It has destroyed me." She did not answer. He stepped closer, voice breaking for the first time in years. "I loved you. I still do. I will love you until my last breath. But if you tell me to leave, I will walk away. And I will never return." For a long moment, only the wind moved between them. Then Ilara whispered, her voice cracked but resolute. "You may stay. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but the first opening of a door he had once slammed shut with his own hands." And Dorian understood. Redemption would not be given. It would have to be earned. Every day, every breath, every scar. The next years of Alara's exile unfolded not as a punishment, but as a quiet reawakening she never expected. She had arrived at the remote village of Brackenhill, with nothing but the clothes on her back, and the shame her husband had stamped onto her name. The gossip traveled faster than she did. The Duchess, banished for betrayal. People averted their eyes at first. Some sent their children inside when she walked past. Others whispered about the fallen lady, who now lived in the abandoned mill at the river bend. But Alara did not break. She refused to let a lie define her. She worked with her hands, something she had never been allowed to do in the palace. She cleaned the old mill, patched the holes, swept out the dust of 20 forgotten years, and turned it into a home. A humble home, yes, but hers. During the cold months, she volunteered in the village clinic, helping healers tend to fevers and broken limbs. She learned to grind herbs, stitch wounds, calm frightened mothers. Soon, the villagers no longer looked at her with suspicion. They came to her when they needed gentle hands and level-headed wisdom. And so, the Duchess became Alara, the quiet healer of Brackenhill. Her nobility faded into memory, not because she hid it, but because she no longer needed it. Still, on some nights, when the wind crept beneath the shutters and the moon sank behind the forest, she would press a hand to her heart and feel the bruise that time refused to lift. She had once loved Duke Rowan Aylborn with a devotion that blinded her. She had believed that love made two people invincible, that honesty and loyalty were the foundation of a union blessed by the gods. But love, she learned, could rot when planted in the wrong soil. And Rowan had been too weak, too easily manipulated, too afraid to stand against the lies told by the vipers in his own court. He had chosen suspicion over trust, authority over partnership, power over love. And even though years passed, the wound of his betrayal did not heal. It transformed. It became self-respect, boundaries, strength. Far away, in the stone halls of Aylborn Fortress, Rowan's downfall began quietly, not with war or scandal, but with whispers. At first he tried to ignore them. He buried himself in council meetings, hunting expeditions, diplomatic gatherings, anything to avoid the silence that hovered over his estate. But every room in the fortress felt colder without Alara's presence. The hearth in his chambers died often. The servants moved quietly, as if mourning something their lord refused to acknowledge. The first crack appeared when his steward resigned without explanation, after decades of loyal service. Soon after, several merchants ceased trade, citing deteriorating honor within the Aylborn name. The nobles who had once sung his praises now avoided him, giving shallow excuses. But nothing cut deeper than the discovery of the truth. It came one night during a storm, when Rowan found a hidden ledger in the chambers of Lady Marianne, the cousin he had trusted more than anyone. She was the one who had accused Alara, the one who had found evidence, the one whose tears had persuaded him to act swiftly, too swiftly. The ledger listed transactions, bribes, paid to witnesses who had testified against Alara. The letter sealed with Marianne's crest detailed her motive. She wanted the Duchess gone so she could inherit the Aylborn estate when Rowan failed to produce an heir. She had orchestrated everything. And Rowan had believed her. His roar of anguish shook the servants in the hall. He smashed the inkstand, shattered the mirror, tore down the drapery until the room looked like a battlefield. And then he sank to his knees. Not as a duke, not as a commander, but as a man who finally understood the price of his cowardice. He had not simply doubted his wife. He had destroyed her, driven her from her home, thrown her into the cold with nothing. And he had never once gone after her, never once checked if she survived, never once tried to listen. Rain hammered the windows as he pressed his forehead to the floor, choking on the truth. "Gods forgive me," he whispered, "for I have wronged the only innocent soul who ever loved me." But the gods remained silent. Redemption would not be given. It would have to be earned. The next morning, Rowan mounted his horse and left the fortress behind. No guards, no entourage, no royal banner. Only a man riding toward the consequences he had created. He arrived in Brackenhill at dusk. He expected fear, hatred, maybe even curses thrown in his direction. But what he saw instead made his chest tighten. Children ran through the square with baskets of berries. Women hung linens from the cottages. And near the center of it all, kneeling beside an elderly man in pain, was Ilara. Her hair was braided simply, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hands steady, warm and familiar. Rowan dismounted slowly, every step toward her heavier than chainmail. The villagers noticed him first. Conversations fell silent. Children stepped behind their mothers, and every eye locked on the imposing figure in the dark cloak. Ilara rose to her feet. Their gazes met. And for the first time since the day he banished her, Rowan felt fear. Not of her, but of himself. Of the emptiness he had carved into her life. Of the years he could never give back. "Ilara," he whispered. Her expression did not soften. It did not harden. It simply closed, like a door gently but firmly pushed shut. "My lord," she replied, her voice steady. "You are far from home." And he realized in that moment, forgiveness would not be simple. Maybe it would not even be possible. But he had come to try. Even if she sent him away. Even if she never let him close again. He owed her the truth. He owed her everything. Autumn had come to the kingdom like a quiet confession. Leaves fell in shades of rusted gold, carrying with them the remnants of years that could never be reclaimed. In the northern mountains, far from the marble walls of High Court, Ilara Liswyn lived in a small stone cottage, overlooking a valley she had once feared. The years had carved softness into her features, but also strength. Her exile, ordered unjustly by the man she once loved, had forced her to rebuild herself from silence, from grief, from the ashes of a life she no longer recognized. She spent her days teaching village children to read, and her nights weaving stories for herself, trying to convince her heart that forgiveness was not weakness. Sometimes she succeeded. Most days she failed. She had been the Duchess of Ravenshade once. She had been his once. But that life belonged to another woman, one who had not yet tasted betrayal. Even after 7 years, the night she was cast out still haunted her in fragmented memories. The storm, the accusations, the cold rage in Duke Tristan Ravenshade's eyes. He had believed the lie without hesitation, had chosen anger over truth, and sent her away for a crime she hadn't committed. She had begged him to look at her. He had turned away. And that had broken something in her that no amount of time could fully mend. Now, in the hush of early evening, a knock echoed on her wooden door. It was unusual. The villagers never approached after dusk. Ilara tightened her shawl and opened the door. A messenger stood before her, shivering against the mountain wind. "For Lady Ilara," he said, bowing and extending a sealed letter. Her breath faltered. She knew that seal. She could have recognized it blind. The crest of Ravenshade, twin ravens encircling a silver moon, stared up at her like an old wound reopening. Her fingers shook as she broke the wax. Inside, written in a hand she once knew by heart, were words she had never imagined she would read. "Ilara, I have spent 7 years searching for the truth I failed to see when you stood before me, pleading for it. They lied, and I believed them. I chose pride over you. If forgiveness is beyond my reach, then grant me at least the chance to kneel before the woman whose heart I destroyed." Tristan Ilara closed the letter slowly, her pulse drumming in her ears. Tristan Ravenshade, the man who had taken her innocence, her trust, her future, wanted an audience. No apology could erase a lifetime of exile. But there, in the trembling script, she felt something she had not expected. humility. The messenger cleared his throat gently. "My lady, he waits in the valley below." Her breath caught. Here, after all these years. She stepped outside. The wind curled through her hair as she followed the messenger down the narrow path. And then she saw him. Tristan. He stood beside his horse, cloaked in dark velvet, but not with the arrogance of a duke. His shoulders were bowed slightly, his expression hollowed by years of regret. He looked older, not by age, but by consequence. He saw her. She stopped. Neither moved, neither spoke. The pain that lived between them seemed to breathe. At last, Tristan stepped forward, slowly, as if afraid she might disappear. "Ilara." Her name on his lips was a fractured prayer. "I didn't expect you," she whispered. "I didn't expect forgiveness," he replied. "Only a chance to see you with my own eyes. I thought you might refuse the letter. I nearly did." He lowered his head. "You would have been right to." Another gust of wind brushed past them. The valley stretched wide and silent, holding their history like an open book. "Why now?" she asked. "After everything?" Tristan drew a long, unsteady breath. "Because the truth came too late. The people who framed you, they have been unmasked." A flicker of anger flared in her chest, not at the villains, but at him. "How convenient," she said softly. The words stung him visibly. He took a step closer, and she did not retreat, but she did not yield either. "Ilara, I destroyed the best part of my life when I sent you away." She held his gaze, steady as the mountain beneath her feet. "No, you destroyed the best part of yourself. What you did to me, I survived." His breath broke. Her strength cut deeper than her tears ever had. "You are right," he whispered. "I was blind. Pride made me a coward. And what makes you think I want that coward near me now?" She saw it then. A man unraveling, not from power, but from remorse. He swallowed hard. "Because I want to become someone who deserves your forgiveness, even if you never give it." The wind stilled. Even the valley seemed to lean closer. Ilara didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was soft, but firm. "Tristan, forgiveness is not a door you can break down by force. You don't ask for it. You grow into it. And She hesitated, her throat tight. "I don't know yet if I can let go of what you did." His eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with acceptance. "I will wait," he said simply, "even if it takes a lifetime." Ilara looked away, her heart warring with memory and longing. "Go back to your estate," she said at last. "We will speak again, but not tonight." Tristan bowed his head, a gesture of reverence, not authority. "As you wish." He mounted his horse, and before turning away, he whispered, "You deserved a man who believed you. I will become that man, even if you never want him." As he rode into the twilight, Ilara stood alone. Her exile had ended, but her healing had only begun. In the years of her absence, the kingdom changed in ways neither Dorian nor Ilara could have predicted. Rumors of the Duke's growing harshness spread beyond the borders of Eldermere, echoing in courts that once admired him. The man who had been known for his measured leadership now ruled with a coldness that made advisors whisper among themselves. Yet none of them understood the truth. The man sitting upon the ducal throne was a shell held together by regret. All his victories tasted of ash. All his nights were haunted by a face he had driven away with his own hands. He never remarried, not because he expected Ilara to return, but because every woman who entered his hall carried a faint resemblance to her, and that resemblance broke him a little more each time. The servants noticed, The nobles gossiped, and the kingdom wondered why a man with such authority lived with such emptiness carved into him. But the answer lay in the quiet hours of dawn, when Dorian wandered the deserted corridors of Eldermere Castle, touching the walls as if trying to feel memories trapped within the stone. He often stopped by her old solar, a room kept closed since the day she left. Sometimes he found himself with the key in hand, trembling, but unable to turn it. He feared the ghost waiting beyond that door more than any enemy on the battlefield. Meanwhile, far from Eldermere, Elara had built a life in the quiet coastal province of Meriden. Simple, quiet, honest. She lived among fishermen, widows, and orphaned children left behind by storms. She taught the little ones to read. She mended nets with trembling hands. She offered smiles she barely remembered how to form. In Meriden, no one called her "my lady." They simply called her Elara. There was peace in that, and sorrow too. Every night she carried the weight of the accusation Dorian had once hurled at her. Thief, traitor, liar. And even though the villagers loved her kindness, Elara still flinched when someone raised their voice unexpectedly. But she had also learned strength. True strength, not the borrowed kind that came from titles and noble blood. She had fought hunger, sickness, loneliness. She had survived humiliation and betrayal, and despite everything, she had not hardened. Pain had made her wise, grief had made her gentle, and years had carved a grace into her soul that suffering could never steal. The kingdom trembles. 7 years after Elara's exile, a threat rose from the southern border, rebels who sought to fracture the realm under the guise of justice. But their numbers grew quickly, fueled by resentment and hunger. They raided villages, burned granaries, kidnapped nobles for ransom. Dorian fought them with all the fury of a man who no longer feared death. On the battlefield, he was ruthless. Off the battlefield, he was restless. Then came a night when his scouts brought news that shattered him. "The rebels have taken Meriden, my lord." Dorian froze. Meriden. The one place he had never allowed himself to think of too deeply. The commander continued. "They are taking hostages, women and children." Dorian's vision blurred. "Are the lists complete?" "We have names, but survivors say more were hidden." "There is one name," people whispered before the rebels silenced them. "A woman who helped the children escape through the cliffs. They said her name was..." Dorian's heart stopped. Elara. The world tilted. The breath left his chest. And for the first time in 7 years, he felt alive. Not in joy, but in terror. "What happened to her?" he whispered. "We don't know, my lord." He did not wait for more. He did not summon his council. He did not sleep, eat, or breathe another moment in hesitation. He mounted his warhorse, issued the terse order, "To Meriden, now!" and rode through the night like a man chased by all the sins of his past. The rescue Meriden was smoke when he arrived. The village square burned. Men screamed. Children wept. Dorian cut down rebels with a violence born not of duty, but of desperation. He searched every house, every alley, every burning doorway. "Elara!" he called, his voice cracking. "Elara, where are you?" He had no right to speak her name like that, but fear drowned pride. At last he found her, not in the ruins, but standing on a cliff behind the village, shielding 3 terrified children with her own body as rebels cornered her. For one suspended breath, time froze. She was older, thinner, with wind-tangled hair and a fierceness in her eyes he had never seen. But it was her, the woman he had destroyed. "Elara." She startled at his voice, not with recognition, but with fear. Dorian felt the floor of his soul collapse. The battle for redemption begins. He fought like a beast to reach her. Steel met steel. Blood spilled. Cries echoed. When the final rebel fell, Dorian dropped to his knees before her, not as a duke, not as a warrior, but as a man stripped of every illusion. "Ilara, please," he whispered. "Don't fear me." Her eyes locked onto his, searching for the lie. But what she saw was something she had never seen in him before. Remorse. Not the convenient kind. The devastating kind. She said nothing. She simply gathered the children and walked past him. Not with hatred, but with the kind of wounded dignity that hurts more than any blade. Dorian did not stop her. He simply followed, like a shadow begging for the warmth it once scorched. He saved her life that night. But regaining her trust, that would take a lifetime. The storm had almost passed when Lord Alistair Ravenshade finally reached the old stone bridge that led to the abbey. Rain dripped from his cloak, his boots sinking into the mud, his breath uneven from the long climb. The years had aged him, not in body, but in soul. Guilt carved deeper wounds than time ever could. The abbey stood quiet, its tall windows glowing with warm candlelight. For a moment he hesitated, as if crossing that final stretch would demand more courage than any battlefield ever had. And it did. Because for the first time in his life, he feared rejection. He feared that the woman whose heart he had shattered would turn away from him with the same coldness he once showed her. But he knocked. The door opened slowly, revealing Sister Madeline, the woman who had taken Leora in years ago. Her expression sharpened when she recognized him. "You have no right to be here," she said. "I know," Alistair whispered. "But I beg you, let me see her." "Why?" Sister Madeline's voice held no mercy. "To break her again? To accuse her of new crimes? To drag her name through the mud one last time?" He shook his head desperately. "No, I came to ask forgiveness." The old nun studied his face. The exhaustion, the regret, the scars grief had carved. After a long silence, she stepped aside. "She is in the garden. Do not raise your voice. Do not touch her. And if she sends you away, you leave without another word." "I will," he promised. He walked through the dim corridors, each familiar scent cutting deeper. Lavender, beeswax, the scent of clean stone. The place where she had rebuilt her life, where she had survived what he destroyed. Then he reached the garden. Leora stood beneath the old magnolia tree, her hair braided loosely down her back, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders. She looked stronger than he remembered, not fragile like the night she had been exiled, but whole, serene, untouchable. For a moment, Alistair couldn't breathe. She turned when she heard his steps. Her eyes widened, but not with fear, not with love, with something far colder, recognition of a past she had outgrown. "Alistair," she said softly, simply acknowledging his name like an old wound. He bowed his head. "Leora, I came to apologize," she finished, her tone steady. "I expected you would one day." Her calmness wounded him more deeply than anger ever could. "Yes," he whispered, "I wronged you. I ruined your life. And all this time, you carried the truth alone." She studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" He swallowed. "Because I discovered the truth too late. Because the man who accused you is dead. Because the real thief confessed before he died. Because the blame that fell on you was meant for someone else." His voice broke. "And because I banished my own wife for a crime she never committed." The wind stirred the magnolia petals at their feet, scattering them like old memories. Leora didn't cry. She no longer cried for him. "I waited for you to believe me," she said quietly. "For months, for years. I wished you would look into my eyes and see I was not lying. But you chose pride instead of truth." "Yes," he whispered. "You chose power over love." "Yes. And you chose to lose me. His breath trembled. I did, and I regret it every day. Silence fell. Not heavy, not cruel, just final. Leora stepped closer, her gaze gentle yet unyielding. Alistair, I forgive you. His eyes widened. You do? Yes, she said. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry the weight of your cruelty any longer. Forgiveness is not for you. It is for me. A tear slipped down his cheek. But I will not return, she continued. I am not the woman you exiled, and I cannot be the wife you abandoned. My life is here now. My peace is here. My purpose is here. And you must build a new life without me. Alistair bowed his head, accepting the sentence he had earned long ago. May I ask one last thing? He said, barely above a whisper. What is it? May I remember you? She smiled, soft, sad, and strangely kind. You may, and I will remember who you were before the world hardened you. Her voice softened. But we walk different paths now. He nodded. He felt older than his years. As he turned to leave, she called after him one final time. Alistair. He froze. I did love you, she said. More deeply than I should have. But goodbye. He closed his eyes, letting her words sink into the part of him that would never fully heal. Goodbye, Leora, he whispered. And with that, the man who once cast her into darkness walked alone back into the night, while she, the woman he wronged, remained bathed in the gentle glow of the Abbey lights. He had lost her forever, but in losing her, she finally regained herself.